Dean, appreciate the time. How are you?
I'm good, man. How are you, man? Thank you for having me on, man. It is an honor to be here. Just thank you, man. So let's get into it, homie.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. So I'm a casual UFC fan. Ever since the pandemic, I've been watching more and more and more. And I actually got a chance a few months ago to go to the UFC at Madison Square Garden, where we saw the Israel Adesanya fight for the first time up against Alex in the UFC, and we know that Alex won. What impressed me the most with this one, Dean, was how locked in Israel Adesanya was and how confident he was with their history even before the UFC.
Yeah, it's rare when you got a guy who is 0-3 in combat to one guy and to have the confidence that Izzy had against Alex. I mean, that is absolutely rare, and it is inspiring. I look at that and I go, wow, how could I use that into my normal everyday life? But yeah, he was absolutely locked in. And the only time I've ever seen Izzy locked in like that was in Abu Dhabi when he fought Paulo Costa. He absolutely destroyed Paulo Costa. But he came out there, he did his thing against Alex Pereira, and he got his belt back.
And I don't know how you felt about it going in, but I thought Israel Adesanya was going to win, because when I was at Madison Square Garden, I know he got knocked out, but I thought he was the better fighter in the first fight.
It seemed like that. And I know a lot of people put a lot into the fact that he lost to this guy 3 times. And I didn't think Izzy was going to win. I know it had nothing to do with the fact that he lost to him 3 times. It was just a stylistic matchup that I didn't know if he had the skill set in order to solve the puzzle. But he proved to be the smarter fighter. He proved to be the better guy. And I think a lot of it had to do with his confidence. Just the fact that even though he was down 0-3 to this guy, he still believed that he could win the fight. And he went out there, he absolutely executed perfectly. Had some trouble in the beginning with the leg kicks, but just the execution of his finish was solid.
Now, at the end of the fight, they do the post press conference, and you had Dana White say that Alex is probably going to go up to 205. Israel Adesanya said the same thing. And I'm sitting here as a casual fan, Dean Thomas. I'm saying, no, not so fast. I got to see the trilogy in the UFC. Do you think we'll get that, or do you believe what we heard after the fight was very genuine?
Absolutely not. And shame on you fans for wanting to see the trilogy.
Why?
With Alex Pereira is a big guy.
He is,
for him to make 185 is very taxing on his body. I think that he only did this to prove that he was a better fighter than Israel Adesanya. But I know that in his heart, he wants to fight at 205 because cutting that extra 20 pounds is taxing on him. I believe that he just would rather fight up at 205. I think he's glad that this is over so that he can fight up at 205. I'm not sure the success he's going to have there, but there's no way he goes down to make 185 again, because I know him. He walks around at about 240 pounds. He's a large human being, and making 185 has got to be tremendously difficult for him.
If they were to fight again, I know you just said you don't think that's going to happen, would you pick Adesanya to win?
Yeah, this time I would definitely pick Adesanya to win. There were some holes in Pereira's game that I saw that I think Adesanya would be able to exploit. I think that he'd be able to exploit him on the ground. And then just Pereira's defense. His defense isn't the best, and we've seen that before. We saw it in the first fight. But I think his presence is what scares people, and they kind of run from him. So you never really get a chance to see him use his defense in a way where he needed to. But in this fight, he needed to use his defense. It wasn't there for him, and Izzy was able to exploit that.
It looked like the environment in Miami was awesome, and I know Dana White said that they will definitely be back, and it reminds him of L.A. all these years ago. That's what really got me hooked to the sport when I went and saw it at MSG, because being in the building, it's pretty much like second to none. Maybe like a few other sports could rival it. But what did you think about the job that Miami did?
Miami is just a great place for fights. I mean, I came up in Miami. I had my first fight in Miami in 1997, and Miami is a great place for fighting. It's very historic now. And something else happened in Miami that I've never seen before. When Donald Trump showed up, I've never seen a crowd react the way they did, like they did in Miami. It was absolutely outstanding, the type of reception that the fans gave the celebrities like Donald Trump and Kid Rock and all the other guys that was there. Miami held it down for his very own George Masvidal. I mean, it was a great environment, great event. And if you've never been to these UFC events, it's something that you have to witness live. I know it's probably better to watch it on TV, but you have to be in there in the environment to watch it live because the atmosphere is electric. And when something happens, like a knockout happens, it's unexpected. You can't rival it in sports.
But you know it's a pretty big deal with all that were in attendance when you have Joe Burrow and Justin Jefferson and Aaron Donald in there, and they're not even close to being the top 5 or top 10 names that were in the building for that fight.
No, absolutely not. In fact, you know, when you look out into the crowd and you see, you know, like Max Crosby, he's sitting like, you know, 5th row in the back, like hidden behind everybody. It's incredible. I'm like, you know, the UFC is just such a fan favorite sport to a lot of different celebrities. I'm surprised that it hasn't caught on even more now.
Talking to Din Thomas right now, Zach Gelb in for Maggie and Perloff. You mentioned Masvidal. He said that was his last fight ever. So important to be bringing back the UFC to Miami. Just had you taken that fight and then the reaction afterwards with the announcement that didn't really surprise many people?
No, it didn't surprise me at all. And I know throughout my career, I've watched Masvidal come up since he was a young man, even before he was in the UFC, when he was still, you know, fighting in the regional scene down in Miami. And it just takes a toll on your body. Masvidal, there's nothing more that he could do at this point. He was trying to make his last championship run. If he can't beat a guy like Gilbert Burns, there's no way he's ever going to be able to get to the title. He's doing the right thing by bowing out now while he still has all his faculties. He's made a lot of money. He's done a lot of things. He's famous. So it's best that he just get out and keep bringing us those boxing events. That Game Bred 4 was boxing 4 was a tremendous event. Roy Jones Jr. and Anthony Pettis, come on, give it to me all day. I'm here for it.
And also, in a sport like this, with how much you have to invest and sacrifice as a fighter, if you start to think you're done, that means you're done, right?
Yeah, and that was a bad sign, because anytime you go into a fight and you say, you know, if I don't win this one, I'm probably going to retire. When things get a little tough for you in there and you stop having fun inside the octagon, you're not going to fight like a real dog. And you could see that in him. He didn't defend those takedowns well. He didn't defend the right hand well. And that had a lot to do with the fact that he knew that he didn't really have a lot left. You know, if you took Jorge Masvidal from 10 years ago, he would have fought through some of those things. But now at 37, almost maybe 38 now, Rich, he's not fighting out of adversity.
So the first time I saw Rui Rosas fight, I was so impressed because he just commanded that stage at such a young age of 18 years old. And through the first round on Saturday, I thought he was going to win again. And then he just got dominated the rest of the way. What advice would you give him? And what do you think the next step is for him? Because that's tough when you're, 18, 19 years old and you're fighting grown men.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, ignorance is bliss. And the fact that he's never been in these spots before, he was very ignorant to the magnitude of what he was about to do. So he was going in like thinking that he was the best in the world. I was in the fighter meetings with him a few days prior, and he was in there talking about how he had trained with all these different UFC guys and beat all these different guys up, and that he's ready for their fight for a title. And he just didn't know because he'd never had the type of adversity that he was about to face. He still commanded the stage like a veteran, but when it got tough for him, he realized he was 18 years old. He realized he was still a boy, still a young man. My advice for him is to go back to the drawing board, take a little bit of the limelight off of him, and go back and work on his skill set. Because if he continues to go like he does and he fights these good guys, he's not going to be a success, and he's going to be done by the time he's 25.
And I know Dana said afterwards, it happens. No one goes undefeated in this sport. But I wonder what his next step is. And after I heard that from Dana, they're still going to probably use him a lot, I would imagine. But I do wonder what the next step is and what the next fight he does get.
You know, what I think is they're going to probably start putting him on fight nights, probably still on main cards, but on fight nights, probably not pay-per-view events, but fight nights. He's still going to be a draw, but they're going to have to do some work with him. And I think that he's going to have to find something in training, because he comes from one of those camps where it's very exclusive to his people, and they're kind of separated. They don't bring a lot of other people in. When you have those type of camps, you just don't really get the looks that you need in order to compete with today's game. So he's going to have to branch out a little bit in his training and really explore what else is out there, I believe.
So we talked about Masvidal, we talked about Rosas, we talked about the main attraction of this big UFC 287. What else in closing, Din Thomas, stood out to you from what was a sensational night for the sport on Saturday?
Oh, how could you forget about the Kelvin Gastelum Chris Curtis fight? If you are not an MMA fan and that was the first fight you've ever seen, it had to be exciting. We're talking about a back and forth battle between two guys, two big middleweights punching and slugging it out with each other. That was a great fight. I thought that to me stood out in terms of excitement. So I got to give shout out to both of those guys, Chris Curtis and Kelvin Gastelum, for putting on a show and leading the way to putting MMA on the map.
You know, it's also always entertaining to me afterwards, and you see these guys just beat the crap out of one another, and you see afterwards Gilbert Burns celebrate with his kids. I thought was pretty neat. And even after the fight, this was, I guess, in the tunnel in Miami, you saw Alex and Israel embrace. That's always, it's weird to me when you see people beat the crap out of each other and then the mutual respect that there is afterwards.
Well, talk about, you know, when you get retired and you don't have to fight these guys. When I was fighting and competing, I thought everybody was my enemy. Now that I'm, well past my years, yeah, they love me. They're like, man, they're like, I had so much respect for you. I was afraid of you. I was like, man, why didn't you tell me that when we were fighting?
Yeah, that's unbelievable.
Could have had a much better career. Yeah.
Well, I enjoyed you on the coverage on Saturday, Dean. Really do appreciate you doing this. Thanks so much.
Thank you, man. I appreciate you.